From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. On Tuesday, the Alabama Legislature will reconvene its 2025 regular session. More on that in a bit, but first, some news we are catching up on from late last week. Governor Kay Ivey, on Friday, commuted the death sentence of Robin Rocky Myers to life in prison, saying there were enough questions about his guilt that she could not move forward with his execution. Ivey said that Myers, who is 63 years old, will spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole, instead of being executed later this year. Ivey noted that this was the sentence that jurors recommended at his trial back in 1994. Ivey said she's a staunch supporter of the death penalty, but, quote, "I have enough questions about Mr. Myers' guilt that I cannot move forward with executing him. In short, I am not convinced that Mr. Myers is innocent, but I am not so convinced of his guilt as to approve his execution. I therefore must respect both the jury's decision to convict him and its recommendation that he be sentenced to life without parole." End quote. Myers was convicted of the capital murder of Luddy Mae Tucker at her Decatur home back in 1991. He has long maintained he is an innocent, and a juror at his 1994 trial supports the push for clemency. The reprieve came over the objections of Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall, who said he was astonished by the governor's decision. It will be day 11 when the House and Senate convene tomorrow. There are 3 legislative days expected this week, with all the committee meetings thrown on top. That can make for a pretty busy week here in the State House. In the House of Representatives, we could see legislation on crime and immigration continue to move. There's also legislation allowing nursing mothers to be exempt from jury duty, and a bill prohibiting judges from granting youthful offender status to anyone 16 or older accused of murder. Lawmakers are also talking about government efficiency and some ongoing efforts they've had to trim the fat within state government.
We'll be working, just FYI, I mean, we're going to be working on some issues probably in the next few weeks. We've got a committee in the House called the Financial Responsibility Committee, and we've had a group for about 3 years that has been working on different agencies, making sure the money is spent the way it's supposed to be, making sure the money goes where it's supposed to be. I mean, we've been doing the DOGE committee before it was popular, and so what I've asked them to do is to come together and get those people that's been working on it, and to have some public hearings, and so everybody understands what they've been doing, what they've seen, and transparency that they've gotten. I think that's important, especially in today's world, and I think it's something to be positive.
In the Senate, there are early whispers about gambling legislation resurfacing this year. You might remember that last year it was the House that passed a comprehensive gambling bill, which included everything from sports betting to a lottery and Class 3 Vegas-style casinos. However, that bill faced significant opposition in the Senate, where it ultimately failed. Despite Republicans holding a supermajority in both the House and Senate, such a bill would likely require support from Democrats to move forward. To gain insight, we spoke with Senate Minority Leader Bobby Singleton to get his take on what the prospects are of a new gambling bill, its chances of gaining Democratic support, and where he believes the proceeds should be directed.
You know, they're still looking at trying to bring in sports wagering, a lottery, and some kind of a gaming, at which level, whether it would be Class 2 or Class 3, whichever we think that we can get past. You know, I don't think all of this money need to go to roads and bridges. I think that we have a lot of things going on. The federal government takes care of a lot of our roads and our bridges, but yet and still, we got Medicaid that need money. We need to do some more health care and rural health care, save some of our hospitals. I think there's a lot of places that money can go before we go to road and bridges. And I don't have a problem with some of it going to road and bridges, but that does not need to dominate where the dollars go. And until, you know, me and my party see it, we can't commit to vote for it until we see it.
And joining me now to talk about what we can expect when the legislature returns are my Capitol Journal colleagues, Randy Scott and Jeff Sanders. Gentlemen, it's going to be an interesting week, it looks like.
That's putting it mildly.
Well, Jeff, you had the reporting from the Senate on the possibility of gambling coming back. So I got to start there because, you know, the conventional wisdom as the session began was that no gambling this year because of all the drama that happened last year. House didn't want to touch it, all that. But it sounds like maybe some whispers going on in the Senate.
Whispers. Seems like there are always whispers. If not this year, it's hard to think it would be next year with it being an election year. But there are whispers, and maybe after spring break. I don't know how to take too seriously some of those whispers, but basically I haven't heard a whole lot from Republicans. I talked to Bobby Singleton, as we saw earlier, and Democrats are all for this, but as we've discussed so many times, it's such a complicated, layered issue, from the existing bingo halls in the state to possible lottery to sports betting. I think a lot of things have to fall into place, and right now it's really, when you look at the math, just the overall math in the Senate, especially losing Greg Reed to the Department of Workforce, he was a yes vote. It's hard to really figure out where the math adds up.
Right, and it was interesting because one week we had Senator Singleton here on Capitol Journal. I asked him about gambling. He said, well, yeah, we're some talk about it and all that kind of stuff. The very next week we had Senator Albritton, obviously very involved in gambling conversation, and he said, well, I don't have the votes, so until we have the votes, let's not even talk about it. Two very different things to hear, but we'll be following that going forward. Randy, in the House, you did some reporting on this Doge. Doge is all the kind of the watchword in D.C. right now, as Elon Musk and his group go through the federal government with some pretty dramatic cuts. The House and Senate, the legislative leaders here, and to add the governor on that too, want to do some things on the government efficiency, but they say that their Doge has been around for years.
Talking to House Speaker Nathaniel Ledbetter, he said that, as a matter of fact, they've been doing something like this before, as he said, Doge was Doge. For the last 3-4 years, they've met at what they call the Financial Responsibility Committee. For about 3 years. They've been taking looks at different agencies around the state, how they get money, what do they do with the money, and where does the money go. They've been going through it with a fine-tooth comb. So it's kind of like the Alabama version of Doge, but it's one that has been focusing a lot on financial responsibility. And again, making sure if they get money, they spend it correctly, and where does it go, and just follow the money trail, as they say.
I remember when Senator Orr, I think it was back in 2019, he brought the legislation establishing the Alabama Commission for the Evaluation of Services. It's one of those things like...
I'm proud you remember
say
that.
Say that 5 times fast.
I had to really try. And it was like, okay, is this one of these government things that gets set up? Because it happens every 10 years or so. Somebody will say, we need to be more efficient. We need to find ways to cut. But my understanding is this commission has been working behind the scenes a lot to evaluate what's going on. And now they're going to be called to testify before, like you said, the responsibility committee. So that may be something really dramatic. I guess, is that planned for when they come back from spring break, that week in between?
After spring break, the speaker said they want to basically not take it on the road, because of course they're here in session, but have some public hearings, bring people into the State House, let them look at it, ask questions of lawmakers. He said the main thing we want to do is make sure this entire process and what happens with it is transparent. We want people to see it. We want people to talk to us. We want people to ask questions. So we want to be physically responsible, but we also want to be transparent and responsible.
Well, I know that'll be appreciated not just from the general public, but for those working in state agencies. I don't think they really want to happen what has really happened in Washington so far, with a lot of uncertainty. What in the world's going on?
And don't forget, Alabama, we have to have a balanced budget every year. So, it is a little different than running up the trillions and trillions of deficits we do on the federal level.
Oh, world of difference, night and day. Jeff, we had this, last week we had this filibuster to end the week. I think it was 6 hours, something like that.
6, 7, somewhere in that ballpark. You lose track after a while.
Obviously, we reported a lot on that last week, but sometimes things can kind of carry over into the following week. Sometimes they burn out and aren't a big deal at all. What are you hearing in the Senate in terms of this filibuster? Are feelings hurt? Are we going to have more filibusters this year or this week? Where are we headed?
It's hard to tell. Basically, this is over the archives bill and changing the structure of the board. Democrats worry if these changes are made, could you go back and, as they said, change the history of black Alabamians? Maybe that's a worst case scenario. They say they're going to fight this bill. In fact, Senator Singleton said they will use every tool in their box to fight this. If it comes back up, they'll do it again. Senator Chris Elliott, who has brought the bill, has stated in some interviews that, cloture is always a possibility to shut down the debate, but senators are really hesitant to use cloture. It's what they call the nuclear option. They would rather find a workaround. So I think they will figure out something with this bill, or it just may die a slow death. So we'll see what happens coming up this week. And, I think they would like to get this out of the way and over with as soon as possible. But at the same time, I think if you cloture, that's when feelings get hurt.
Sure.
And I think that's when you start having some resentment, and then that could really eat into the rest of the year with the Senate.
And everybody's got legislation they want to
Correct.
pass. Randy, real quick on the House, hasn't seemed to be a lot of blow-ups down there. Everybody's kind of waits and sees what's going on. What has been the mood in the House in terms of the majority and the minority working together, filibusters, long and drawn-out debate? What's the mood been so far?
Things, for the most part, especially this past week, have been even keel. They have been working together. They have been asking questions about various bills, whether it's crime-fighting bills, or you're starting to also hear bills dealing with immigration starting to come up. But you can tell that there is a genuine push to work together to get legislation to pass, because they know a couple of weeks from now, the budgets are going to come up, and they definitely want to make sure everybody's on the same level. And as we've said, there are no hard feelings for anything that did not pass or was cut out. So for the most part, there have been a ton of law legislation, if you will, crime-fighting legislation that has come up and is continuing to come up. And as we said, you're starting to see immigration measures. There was one in the House Judiciary Committee the other day come up and be talked about. So they're getting along. They're having tough talks about these bills, but they're getting along. It's nothing like the WWE in the House chamber. So they're getting along right now.
There have been moments a long time ago that a bit resembled that. Well, gentlemen, we're out of time. We'll be looking forward to your reporting all week. It's another long week, but we've got the spring break coming. It's on the horizon.
What's a spring break?
We got 2 of them this year.
We have 2 of them?
That's right. That's right. Well, look, thanks for your time, and we'll be looking forward to your reporting this week. And we'll be right back with State Health Officer Dr. Scott Harris. Stay with us.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next is Dr. Scott Harris, Public Health Officer for the state of Alabama. Doc, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me, Todd. Good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a while, and but I wanted to have you on to ask about this measles thing. We're hearing reports of this measles outbreak in Texas, which, if you think about that, it's not something we're used to seeing. Measles is supposed to be a thing of the past, but what's going on with this measles outbreak?
Yeah, we don't tend to think about measles much in this country, which is a good thing because we don't see a lot of it. But measles remains a really dangerous disease throughout the world. It's probably the most infectious disease. It's probably the easiest to spread of any infection that we know of.
Wow.
And so when you get to populations where people aren't fully vaccinated or aren't vaccinated at all, it can really spread really quickly. If you have a person who's not vaccinated who's exposed to measles, about 90% of the time they'll get infected. People with measles, can do okay. A lot of our maybe parents and grandparents had to experience that. But even today, even with modern medicine, about 1 out of 5 kids with measles is going to end up in the hospital. And somewhere around 1 out of 100 may not survive. So what's happened in the past few weeks is that in West Texas, there's been an outbreak in a community there that did not have very good vaccination rates. Not sure where the first case came from, but probably a traveler from somewhere, came there. And they've had almost 150 people infected, most of them children. They've had about 25 kids in the hospital. They've had 1 death I think it was a 3rd grader or 2nd grader. And so it's really worrisome because it can easily spread to other places.
Goodness. Well, I was going to ask you about, because I did assume that it was probably a vaccine thing, because we've seen a lot of vaccine skepticism over the last couple of years. Obviously, a lot of that tied up into COVID, and I'll get to that later. But it's okay. So if I did not get my kids vaccinated and they come into contact with somebody, they're like you said, very infectious. What if you are vaccinated and come into contact with somebody? Are you protected?
Almost always, if you're fully vaccinated. So the recommendation now is to get 2 shots of MMR vaccine. Most of us get one about age 12 months, and then you get your second one about the time you start school, and that protects almost everyone for life. Almost the only time that won't work is that occasionally you'll have a person in whom the vaccine just doesn't work, but that's really rare. But there are people out there who are unvaccinated all the time, such as every child under age 12 months. You know, the vaccine's not available if you're under 12 months of age. So every baby is fully unvaccinated and really highly susceptible to measles. You also have kids who just have immune system problems and aren't able to take that vaccine. They're not protected and they're very susceptible to measles. So we're always going to have some people who can't be vaccinated or in whom the vaccines don't work, even when and that's really the reason that you need the population fully protected so that the disease doesn't spread to those folks.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're a long way from West Texas, but should we be worried at all in Alabama about a potential measles outbreak?
Well, we should be vigilant. During the pandemic, vaccination rates of all kinds, including measles, really fell because of all these disruptions in the medical system, and people just weren't getting routine primary care and so on. The rates are getting better, but we're still below where we would like to be with measles vaccine. We have enough unvaccinated people that if we were to have a case, it could really be dangerous. The last case in Alabama was in about 2002, so it's a very rare situation. And the last death in Alabama was in 1973. So those are really unusual. But you can see what can happen just in a single community. Within 2 or 3 weeks, 150 cases pop up. Back in 2019 in New York City, there was over 100 cases that happened associated with an outbreak. So it can really spread quickly if it gets into the right population.
Mm-hmm. And I want to get into more of that, but what are the protocols, right? Like, let's just say it happened here. What are some of the things they're doing in that Texas town in order to stop the spread? I mean, I'm guessing this is when public health becomes really important in terms of the protocols for how to go about stopping the spread.
Yeah, so for everyone who lived through COVID, you're probably familiar with some of that advice. I mean, the advice is go see your doctor, find out about your own vaccination status and get vaccinated as soon as you can. Even 1 shot will protect pretty well, not fully like 2 shots, but if you're unvaccinated, even getting that first shot can protect you right away. And then we also, just like in COVID, want to remind people, please stay home if you're sick. If you've got fever, if you've got some concern that you might not be well, that's not a good time to travel and be around other people.
Mm. Well, yeah, so much of this vaccine skepticism comes from COVID. And look, it was a tough time. Nobody knows that better than you. It was a tough time. You saw a lot of frustration in the public. People saying, "Look, I don't want that in my arm. Maybe it was the speed with which it got developed. There were other factors, but that's in the past, at least for now. How do we build confidence in vaccines, considering how much life-saving medical research has gone into this for a reason, to put these diseases behind us, polio, measles, all these things, mumps? How do we build confidence, restore maybe confidence among parents and things like that for an early age, just make it part of the routine?
Yeah, there's not a real simple answer to that, or we would have tried to fix it, already. It does take time for people to develop confidence, to build trust again. We're living in a low trust society in a way, and there's so much information out there that people get from so many different sources. It's really hard to know how to sort it out sometimes if it's conflicting. I think what I would ask people to do again is reach out to your healthcare provider that you trust. The doctor or the pediatrician or the person you see that knows you and knows your family, someone who's trained and understands this, and ask them, for their best advice. For things like measles vaccine, we've had this vaccine using essentially this same vaccine for over 40 years. You know, we've had measles vaccines for over 60 years. The current one has been around for, you know, a long, long time. That's true with most of the childhood vaccines that kids get. You know, the one for whooping cough, for tetanus, even the hepatitis vaccines now are, you know, more than 30 years old. These are safe and effective vaccines. It would be my opinion as the guy in public health, but you know, you don't have to take my word for it. Go talk to your own physician. You know, ask them what you think they should do. Certainly, those tried and true vaccines that have been around for so long, I think we know very well that they're effective and that they're safe.
And just look at what's happening to point out what happens when, you know, people don't take that advice. Switching gears, I guess we're kind of coming off of flu season, or at least I hope we are. I mean, the weather changes day to day. But what kind of flu season did we have? How infectious? What, you know, was it severe? How severe was it?
This was one of the worst flu seasons we've had in the past decade. It's certainly the worst one since the pandemic, for sure. We are getting better now. Those case numbers are starting to fall. We also have the ability around the country now to monitor wastewater for evidence of flu vaccine, to see what's going on in the communities, and those wastewater levels of flu virus are declining as well, so that's a good sign. The vaccine was, this year, this particular version of the flu vaccine was an okay match, but not a great match. So we're not surprised, you know, sometimes that when you see spikes like that, in order to make a flu vaccine, you know, they start manufacturing it a few months before flu season starts. So you're making an educated guess about which strains you think you're likely to see. And this year, what wasn't the best match, and that happens sometimes. So we do want to remind people, you know, flu shots are a great idea for anybody 12 months of age and up, particularly for older people, for pregnant women, for people that have immune system problems. Flu vaccines really do lessen the severity of disease, and really ought to consider thinking about those.
What about bird flu? I know that this is more of an agricultural issue, but I mean, you can't turn on the news or read a newspaper without seeing bird flu and how it's impacting eggs and chickens and things like that, maybe other barnyard animals. But should we be concerned about bird flu at all? I mean, it just kind of sounds like a bad thing you don't want around.
Yeah, so the risk of bird flu to people is low. It's not something that we are really worried is going to be a big problem in humans. But, you know, there's always the possibility that the virus could change or could mutate. So that's our job in public health, is to monitor that. The bird flu, on the other hand, has really been devastating for agriculture, right? And so not only do you see these poultry populations that are having to be culled, and that's why, you know, you can't find eggs, you know, when you go to the grocery store. But now, for the first time, just in the past year or so, we've seen bird flu start to infect dairy cattle. And that's never happened before. There are more than 900 dairy cattle farms in the state of California that are seeing bird flu, as well as, you know, about a dozen other states. The cattle actually do okay, but the milk is not used because there's virus in the milk, and so the milk can't be used. And you still have to have people taking care of those cattle because they're dairy cattle, and so you have a lot of human-animal exposure even during that time when the cows are sick. The theoretical concern is that the virus can mutate and become easier to spread. So a person infected with bird flu might have a mutation that leads to that virus spreading just like human flu does. And then that would be, you know, potentially a problem. We haven't seen that. Hope we never see that. We're not expecting that. But that's our job, to monitor that. So we're spending a lot of time working with our colleagues in agriculture and other public health officials, just trying to be vigilant for that.
That sounds all too familiar when you talk about mutations and, and humans and animals.
Yeah.
We don't want to see that movie again.
Yeah, absolutely right.
We're almost out of time, but I wanted to mention, you talked about heading to D.C. next week for, you are the president of your fellow State Health Officers Association. You're also kind of a group of, so congrats, quite a title. Congrats. What entails with that?
Oh, well, thanks for that, Todd. So it's called the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials. It's been around for about 87 or 88 years, and it's the group of my counterparts in the other states and U.S. territories and D.C. So there's like 58 of us, I think. And so we do have a Hill Week every year, usually in March, where we go and meet with Congress, talk to them about public health concerns and other business. It's really a wonderful organization that does a lot for state health departments. In many places, your state health official turns over pretty quickly. The average tenure in this country, particularly since COVID, has been only a year or two. And so the real knowledge of public health many times is in an organization like this, where you have public health folks who've been working for decades, working with state health departments. And so they're just a great organization that helps state health departments figure out how to do things, how to get things accomplished, how to understand dealing with certain problems.
Mm-hmm. Institutional knowledge and sharing it and best practice is always a good thing.
Absolutely.
Dr. Harris, thanks again for your time. We'll look forward to catching up with you. And thanks for this information about measles and everything else. It's very helpful for our audience.
Great. Thanks very much, Todd. Look forward to seeing you again.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page.
Cheaha Mountain, often called Mount Cheaha, is the highest natural point in Alabama at 2,407 feet above sea level. It is located in north-central Alabama in Cheaha State Park, surrounded by the Talladega National Forest in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. This dramatic landscape gets its name from the Creek Indian name for the mountain, Chaha, meaning high place.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow night at the same time right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capital Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.